Earlier this year, Engage released the Pursuit Ultra. In my opinion, it was one of the biggest flops that I have seen of a paddle company release in a while. In fact, it flopped so hard that Engage had to discontinue it and release the Pursuit Pro in less than 6 months from the launch of the Ultra. Well, Engage just went from zero to hero because the Pursuit Pro might be one of the best paddles you can buy right now. The Pursuit Pro costs $260, but with discount code PBStudio, you can save 20%, bringing down the price to $208. There are 4 models for the Pursuit Pro: the MX 6.0, the MX, and the EX 6.0 and EX. The MX models are the elongated shape, while the EX are the standard shape. The 6.0 in each category represents the thickness. The 6.0 models are 16mm, while the non-6.0 are 13mm. Just as a side note, Engage, can you please stop using this 6.0, non-6.0 naming scheme? It would be so much easier if you just said 16mm and 13mm. Thanks. Engage allows you to specify the weight at checkout, and they have 3 categories: light, standard, and plus. The range goes from 7.7 ounces all the way up to 8.9 ounces. All of my models were 8 ounces, except for my Pursuit MX, which was 8.3 ounces. If you want to see the rest of the specs, I'll pop those up on screen briefly, and you can pause the video if you want to read those. Before we move on to how this paddle plays, let's talk about the build quality. Engage paddles still have relatively cheap feeling handles. While they are technically covering the exposed polymer with a piece of material now, the face material sticks out slightly higher than the wood shaping pieces, which creates a sharp edge that doesn't feel very comfortable. And you can still squish the core and kind of feel the exposed polymer even with the covering, especially on the 6.0 models, since those have a 4.4-inch grip circumference, which means there's more core that you can potentially push down with your hand. I was able to get over it. I just wish Engage could create a really solid feeling handle out of the box. The handle is also still oval-ish. It has bevels that you can feel, but they aren't nearly as pronounced as regular octagon handles. Once you put an overgrip on the paddle, it mostly feels like an oval to me. So while they have improved the handle slightly, they're still lagging behind the big competitors. I wish they could figure out how to slim down their handles on the thicker models as well, because you isolate a segment of players by having a grip that's so large. Next, it doesn't appear that there's been any changes to the edge guard. It's still this glossy plastic that seems more brittle than other edge guards, so I would not advise leaving this in extremely cold temperatures or hot temperatures. Lastly, someone was able to take both of the Engages apart, the old Ultra and the new Pro, and they noticed that the core is actually slightly different. While it still appears to be that black core that Engage is known for, on the Ultra, the core was much more rigid and you can see it shaped better, while on the Pro, it looks like it's deformed a little bit, which we've seen on plenty of paddles. That's not necessarily uncommon, but what was more interesting is the core was actually a lot more squishy. So this is an interesting change because I don't recall Engage mentioning anything about the core being modified for this paddle. But it makes a lot of sense because when we get into how this paddle performs, it probably has a lot to do with that core. Okay, I'm gonna talk about spin quickly because Engage made substantial improvements by finally using a raw carbon fiber face. Their paddles have never ranked highly for spin, but these new Engage Pros are absolutely nuts. In my testing, they all achieved a result around 2000 RPM, and when my siblings and I first started using these, we all noticed how hard you could rip a drive and still keep it in with the amount of spin this was getting. Anything over 2000 RPM is in the highest tier of spin, and it's not ever going to be something you need to complain about when spin is that high.
4x1.
Get ready, everybody. He's about to do something stupid.
Out! Let's go! Get your Ernie crap out of here.
If you remember in my Ultra review, I pointed out being slightly disappointed that the Engage Ultras got softer than the original Pursuit line. Well, Engage must have heard that because these new ones are absolute rockets. And again, this probably comes back to that core that we were just talking about a minute ago. Interestingly, during my playtesting, I found that the 6.0 models hit harder than the thinner 13mm variants. This has been a common trend amongst thermoformed paddles, but it's not something that I have seen in a non-thermoformed paddle. And since the Engages aren't thermoformed, I was pretty surprised that this would be the case. Don't get me wrong, both of them still hit hard, but I had a much easier time with my soft game on the thinner core models than I did on the thicker ones. When I went for huge drives on the 6.0 models, the power felt absolutely effortless and the paddle went straight through the ball. The thinner models didn't feel as stable or have the effortless power that I was getting on the thicker ones. With the MX 6.0, it feels like the paddle pockets the ball so much and then launches the ball off the face. These are up there with thermoformed paddles in terms of power. In fact, these are the only non-thermoformed paddles that I've hit in recent times that I think can easily keep up with a thermoformed paddle. Now, when it came to control, it did suffer slightly on the 6.0 models. I know it's really bizarre to say that about the thicker paddle, but every time I took out the thick and thin variants, the thin one was always easier on my soft game. I didn't have to think as hard on blocks, and I felt more connected to the ball on dinks. I think this has to do with the thinner models feeling more firm and the thicker ones feeling much more bouncy. It's like a trampoline on the 6.0 models where the ball sinks in and then just launches off. The thinner models felt more predictable with how the ball would come off, whereas with the 6.0 models, it felt like it was more of a gamble when you nail the sweet spot. The bright side for control is all of these models have pretty generous sweet spots and insane spin, which are both factors that should be considered when talking about control. I classify the 6.0 models as power paddles, and then the non-6.0 fall somewhere between the low to mid side of power paddles. Engage paddles have always had a very satisfying feel off the face, and it's no different with the Pursuit Pro. The biggest difference is that the 6.0 models feel much more bouncy and cushioned when you hit the ball, and the non-6.0 models feel more firm and stiff. I enjoyed how all of them felt, but I did think the thicker ones felt better overall. It's refreshing to have a paddle with this bouncy, cushioned feel and high power, because as of recently, thermoformed paddles have dominated the power charts, and those usually come very stiff. So if you're someone who hasn't really enjoyed paddles feeling so stiff, but you still wanted a lot of power, then these Engages strike a very nice balance. The new Pursuit Pros align with most elongated and standard shaped paddles by today's measure. The MX 6.0 was 123, the MX was 121, the EX 6.0 was 114, and the EX was 107. Keep in mind that most of my models fall into the light category, so if you do choose to buy a heavier weight, the swing weight is probably going to go up as well. Despite the MX 6.0 having a 123 swing weight, which is usually much higher than I prefer, I never had any complaints. It reminds me of when I used to use the Hyperion, and I enjoyed the paddle so much that I was able to just get over the slower hand speed. I think something similar is happening here, because this paddle's an absolute blast to use, so I feel like I'm just more willing to put up with slightly compromised hand speed. That, or your boy finally isn't as weak as he used to be. Who am I kidding? I'm still pretty weak. As far as the EX models go, these did feel considerably faster to swing. So if hand speed is highly important to you, then I would recommend you go with those. Something I found appealing about standard shaped paddles recently is that I feel much more connected to the paddle and the ball. Whenever I go back to an elongated, long handle paddle, dinks feel harder to manipulate as precisely. I feel like I've really come to appreciate some of the shorter paddles on the market more than I have in the past. When it came to adding lead, I didn't think the 6.0 models needed it, but I decided to experiment anyways just to see if there were any interesting results. On the MX 6.0, I added about 6.5 inches of 1 gram per inch lead from the throat up the side of the paddle. I chose this spot because I didn't want to increase the swing weight very much, but I did want to bump up the overall static weight and the twist weight just a little bit. And let me tell you guys, this paddle already hit hard, but holy crap, after this lead setup, it was like hitting with an absolute Mack truck. The ball seriously felt like it was exploding off the face of my paddle when I would go to hit a big drive. If I were to keep the lead applied to this paddle, I would probably take it down to about 4.5 to 5 inches of lead tape on each side because the swing weight did go up to 127, which was starting to feel more sluggish than I would prefer. I think I could still retain most of the same impact that the lead had, but by using less of it. For the EX 6.0, my friend did exactly what I just described and used about 4.5 to 5 inches of lead tape, and the swing weight only went up to 115, which is not even a discernible difference from the stock form. This had nearly the same impact as the setup on the MX 6.0, but without making the swing weight unreasonable. Now, it didn't hit as hard as the MX 6.0, but that's pretty standard when you compare a regular shaped paddle to an elongated paddle. Now, what I did gain was faster hands at the net and better ball control, which is more important to me than having maximum power. Realistically, I would be fully content using both 6.0 models in the stock form, but I do think that adding some lead around the throat area does help the paddle feel a little bit more beefy. Lastly, I placed lead on the MX non 6.0, and I used my 3 grams per inch strips that are pre-cut, and I placed it right above the bottom corners. For the non 6.0 models, they feel less stable than their thicker counterparts, and the lead helped clean up that stability issue. If I used the non 6.0 models as my primary paddle, I would personally have to add lead tape. They aren't bad in stock form, but I think lead is a necessary improvement for those. The Pursuit Pros are what the Ultras should have been. Had Engage released these, people would have been obsessed. These are no question in my mind a top 5 or even top 3 paddle on the market right now. Despite the higher price tag, you get 2 big benefits that are worth considering with the new Engage. First, they aren't thermoformed, so you shouldn't have to worry about core crushing, which has been one of the biggest deal breakers of thermoformed paddles on the market. While it has improved drastically this year from back in January, it is still an issue that I see people facing on a regular basis. I personally have never seen a non-thermoformed paddle have a crushed core. Second, even if something like that could happen, you have a lifetime warranty with Engage, and as far as I can tell, they're very lenient about it. I've had a friend who has sent back the same Engage Pursuit for edge guard issues or a variety of other things, and they always seem to get replaced without any question. I'm not saying they'll always do that. It sounds like it's on a case-by-case basis, but they do seem pretty good about honoring their lifetime warranty. So at $208 after a discount code to have a paddle that shouldn't have one of the biggest design flaws that we've seen from some of the best paddles on the market this year, plus a lifetime warranty, I think that makes this price extremely reasonable. If you're trying to decide which one you should choose, here's how I would break it down. If you want as much power as possible, choose the 6.0 models. If you want power plus you favor some hand speed, choose the EX 6.0. If you want a more firm feel and better ball control, go with the non 6.0 models. What I will say is that I think the least appealing model of all the new Engages is the MX non 6.0. It's not a bad paddle, but the swing weight is still a bit higher, and since the paddle isn't that stable out of the box, you probably have to add lead tape to improve it, which is going to bump up the swing weight a little bit more. So you're not really getting the benefits of the heavier 6.0 models, but the paddle is still pretty heavy out of the box. I highly enjoyed my time with the EX 6.0 and MX 6.0. If I had to choose, I would probably go with the EX 6.0 for better hand speed and better ball control. I have so few negative things to say about this paddle, but anything negative that I could find to say about it, like the exposed polymer, was pretty much negated by how well the paddle played. So yes, the Engage Pursuit Pro is Pickleball Studio approved. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.